Over 45 years and over 35 million unit sales later, we've got the 8th generation of VW Golf. It's not often that we get a car that really redefines class, so much so that in the few years that this car was originally introduced, the compact segment started to become known as the Golf class. That's just how popular this was. Today, we have the 8th generation version, and in the time it took me to say that, according to VW, someone just decided to buy a Golf, as they sell so many units that one sells every 40 seconds. It's truly mind-blowing. And today we have the king of the hill as far as the Golf is concerned, and it is the Golf R, such a popular car across the world, but especially here in the UK, as it gives so much performance in a car that's such a fantastic daily. The Mark 8 takes this formula even further, and before we dive into just how quick and dynamic it is, we're going to look at the full history of the legendary Golf model leading up to today, see what's changed in all the R models leading into the Mark 8 as well, and fully explore this brand new Mark 8 Golf R. So guys, today's episode of RBR is sponsored by my favourite wallet company, The Ridge. Why are they my favourites? Because like you guys, I love carbon fibre, and they make simply the best carbon fibre wallets that I've ever seen. Look at that, matches exactly your car. You can get the forged one as well. Now with slim wallets, I'm usually used to this type of one. Yes, I'm a bit of a tart with the brand, but these can only hold 5, 6 cards maybe, whereas in the Ridge, you can get up to 12 cards plus cash within the cash strap here. I also love that when I put it in my pocket, it doesn't bulge at all, it's super slim. And it's got RFID blocking technology, so no one can take money out of any of my cards. Now, of course, I've got a discount for you guys. All you need to do is go to theridge.com/RBR, use the code RBR. You'll get 10% off one of these awesome carbon wallets. Help support the channel as well, and you'll have something super stylish and something that matches lovely motorsport cars. So go to ridge.com/RBR. So guys, a really warm welcome to VW. Finally make it here on my canvas at RBR. You know, Raz is always a happy boy when we have a new manufacturer to explore, particularly one with a rich history. Though the history of VW, a little bit murky in its original days, because it found its origins in Nazi Germany. Volks, of course, meaning peoples, and back then, many products and services were named Volks something. It could be a radio, it could be anything. But Volkswagen was the name chosen for the people's car, Volkswagen. And it was due to be a car that was as cheap as a motorcycle, because most Germans back then could not afford a car, only 1 in 50. So Hitler wanted the average person to have a government-funded or subsidized car. And that's what Volkswagen was due to be. But the actual brainchild for their first car, the Type 1 saloon that would later be the Beetle, came from someone who we've had previously on the channel, and that was the first Ferdinand Porsche. Yes, the man who was later responsible for the birth of Porsche. So this was a man who was used to building race cars and other types of vehicles, and he always wanted to create a family car. This is what it looked like. The idea for the shape of it actually came from a Mercedes-Benz back when he was chief engineer back at Daimler, which was the H cars that they used to have at Mercedes. But he created this Type 1 saloon. It was, as you can see, Beetle-shaped, very aerodynamic on the front, because we had an air-cooled engine in the rear, a torsion bar suspension on the rear as well. Before things would kick off though, in reality this was a completely financially unsound proposition to build such a cheap car. So while German citizens were saving up and paying in installments or stamps as the government had provided a system, no one ever got delivery of a car other than Hitler, and then later on the military when the war started. So this entire idea of the Nazi Volkswagen was a dead one. It never worked, no car was ever delivered to any customer. Then came the rebirth, the true origin, I think, of Volkswagen, and that can all be credited to British Major Ivan Hurst, who, when the British military took over trusteeship of Volkswagen, took the company and took that Type 1 car and brought it into mass production with over 20,000 orders starting for the British military. Exportation to the rest of the world began shortly after, and Volkswagen quickly became one of the economic miracle examples of the new Germany. The Beetle was selling in huge numbers. It was massively successful. So the pressure upon its successor was going to be that much higher because it had massive shoes to fill. But the Mark I Golf did it with ease. The designer was perhaps one of our biggest car design icons of the 20th century. It was Giugiaro of Ital Design. Giugiaro, you can credit him for cars like the Audi 80, the DeLorean, the Saab 9000, the Lancia Delta, even something like the BMW M1. So this guy was an absolute legend. Now, as far as the Mark I goes, completely different body shape. Of course, we've got now a water-cooled engine on the front. We had that distinctive C-pillar on the rear, a feature that even carries forward still to our car today. It's such a Golf thing. We had the extended arches on the side. We had the very straight and now iconic front that you can even, again, still link to our car today in some ways. But it was a massive success. It only took 2 years to sell 1 million units. And in the 9 years it was around, they sold almost 7 million units. And that's why this type of car, this class of car, even in its first generation, became known as the Golf class. And it didn't take long to make a more dynamic version either. A year after its introduction in 1975, the first GTI came out in 1976. So always sporting aspirations. Then came our Mark II, second generation. Slightly larger, more aerodynamic than the Mark I. Still built in Wolfsburg, but this time with robots. This car brought along technical advancements like ABS, power steering, etc. Brought the whole game forward and sold, again, 6 million units in the 8 years that was around, which is massive. Then we come to Mark III, even more aerodynamic. Of course, it's now larger. We've got a wider track. This brought across things like cruise control, side and front airbags. We had the new VR6 V6 engine in this car. This gen also introduced the TDIs, making diesels fun. And then the success again, it was great. 5 million in just 6 years, which is pretty incredible. Then we come on to the next generation, Mark IV, which is quite relevant actually for our Golf R today. Not only was it a fantastic looking hatchback, even by today's standards in my opinion, it also brought the first all-wheel drive Golf with the 4Motion Holdex driven system, something that would actually later go to power something like my A45 as well, in the type of system it was. So very, very innovative in that sense. We also brought across things like ESP, we had colored navigation, but forget all of that because then came the R32, the original forefather to our Golf R today, the first one. And this was a car that produced 237 brake horsepower from the VR6 15-degree V6 engine. This was paired to the first dual clutch to go in the car, which is the DSG gearbox, and it had a lovely, lovely exhaust note, and all went again to a 4Motion Holdex-driven four-wheel drive system. Though it was quite heavy, in fact, 76 kg heavy than even our Mark VII later on. But then you got to give something to get something. Most of it was because of the engine. Next, we come on to the Mark V. This time a car that's a lot lighter because we now have a laser welded body with more rigidity than ever before. It also introduced a 7-speed box, multi-link rear suspension and electromechanical steering. In terms of our R models, the R32 came back with similar hardware, but this time with 247 brake horsepower and the same amount of torque, but available lower down the rev range, so still very impressive. Then we come to the Mark VI, and this had quite a short life as it was essentially a heavily re-engineered facelift of the previous version. Yet still, it did sell 3 million units, though now starting to look a lot more like our modern Golfs, isn't it? Then in this generation came the first Golf R of its name, but it came with bad news, news of downsizing and turbocharging. Something that we're so used to today is just run-of-the-mill news. Back then, it was doomsday. Gone is the VR6, gone is the hot Golf, everything's over. Little did we know how much this was going to benefit the car. 35 kg weight reduction to begin with. Yes, we have a 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, but it's producing 266 brake horsepower, which is damn impressive. 0 to 60 of 5.5 seconds. And we've got a 5th generation Holdex 4-wheel drive system powering this as well. Fixed a lot of the bugbears people had with how heavy the previous car was in terms of affecting dynamics. So in fact, downsizing, I think VW were actually quite ahead of the curve when they did this move, and they did the right thing when you look at it with hindsight. Then we come on to the next generation, which is, of course, the Mark 7. Now, it's hard to talk about the Mark 7 without talking directly about the Golf R. But let's just tell you a little bit about this car because it was quite important. The proportions were different because this was based on the MQB VAR Group platform that would later go on to underpin other cars like Audis, etc. Now, this gave us actually a more cab rearward design, so more of the car sitting on the rear wheels. We had thus a longer bonnet, slightly lower lights on the front, and you saw just generally a slight proportion change, still maintaining the general Golf look with the solid C-pillar on the rear and, you know, the typical front end, etc. But a definite change going to the MQB platform and a massive change on weight, 100 kg lighter, which is great. It's nice to go backward in this, despite the fact that this car obviously had more technology in it. Then we come to the Golf R. It was one of the best-selling performance hatches ever, particularly in the UK. As I said, it sold so well that it also became one of the most stolen cars ever, which actually explains why our Mark 8 today, this is the first ever press car, and I've had GT2 RSs and everything come here. It's the first ever one with a tracker fob on it, you know? That's how popular the Golf R is. In this generation, we had the EA888 engine, and this time it's producing 296 brake horsepower. So you can kind of see why it was so much bang for buck. 0 to 60, 4.6 seconds with the DSG. Again, incredible for a hatchback of that level. We had, again, the Holdex four-wheel drive system revised again, this time with XDS, which is essentially something that mimics how a limited slip differential would work on the front. All clever stuff, all leading to a car that sadly didn't sound that good because of the addition of the particulate filter inside. We had a sound actuator, which mimics like a larger engine inside the car. Most owners didn't mind it, but it is fake sound at the end of the day. We'll talk more about sound in our MK8 later. But yeah, massive seller. You can understand why. So much performance, so much daily usability, all in a Q car sleeper. Fantastic. Then we come to our Mark 8. And boy, does it look different. I mean, this has been Marmite for you guys. I've read all the comments and I totally get where you're coming from. Now, compared to the normal 8, this new R is 20 millimeters lower. It's got a lighter and more rigid front subframe. When we come to the engine, it's the 4th generation now of the EA888, and this produces 316 brake horsepower and 420 Newton meters of torque, and a claimed 0 to 60 of 4.7, which is interesting. It's just 0.1 of a second slower than the last one. Is it really though? Spoiler, it's not. Wait till I show you just how quick this thing is. It still is paired to the DSG gearbox, which is great to have a dual clutch in there. It's also got larger brakes than the previous model, which you'll see comes at great benefit later on. But the big news is, gone is the Holdex four-wheel drive system, now replaced finally with something new. This is the 4Motion R Performance Torque Vectoring System. What does this do? This has got much more variable torque control, it's much more rear biased, and it can send up to 100% of power to the outside wheel when you're in a corner. Where have you heard me say that before? A45S with the drift mode. And you've probably heard it in the Focus as well. So this is exactly what that is. It makes the car that much more rear biased. If you get the performance package, you even get a drift mode, though it's mechanically identical to one without performance package. We'll get into that later. The point of this is that this car is going to feel a lot more dynamic on the limit. You're going to feel less understeer and a more natural and neutral feeling in corners. So it should make this car extremely exciting to drive. So now the car only comes in automatic. It only comes in 5 doors. In terms of options, you'd be looking at something like the performance package, which adds the 19-inch wheels, the larger Club Sport rear wing, which is quite nice, but you can just buy a part. And you get extra modes of Special, which was honed on Nürburgring, hence the icon, and the drift mode. But as I said, car is mechanically identical, so this is just software that we're talking about with this. Instead, you could spend £3,000 and get the Akrapovic exhaust system, which is going to be of great benefit, as you'll see later. It'd be great to test one of these. This hasn't got it, obviously. This is just VFX, but that's probably money better spent. And something you must absolutely get is the DCC. You must get the adaptive suspension because it makes this car's ride fantastic, especially compared to its rivals. Now, let's discuss design a little bit because it's Marmite, as I said. The front end is probably the most Marmite thing. and it's probably this bit here. And this is just generally a Mark 8 thing rather than an R thing. There's lots of blue in here, and it's this extension here that I think people find so insulting, I guess. And in person, I think it's actually quite dynamic. Looks the car look quite wide, but I get why you don't like it. You maybe want it to stop here. But, you know, it really reminds me, when I look at Golf, it reminds me of 911, because people are so critical that it doesn't change. And then when something does change, everybody loses their minds, right? I think you have to accept some evolution in this. I mean, I like the lower front bumper, which VW say is very motorsport inspired. And if I may say, being Mr. AMG, it looks very AMG-like. It's something like you would see maybe on a 63 AMG. So that's quite aggressive, and you get that same impression in person as well. This is obviously specific on the R. The biggest benefit of the front lights are, of course, the long strip that goes across the front. Some may not like it. I do like it. I think it's quite the feature. The bonnet swoops down and connects to the lights just like a sports car rather than a typical hatch as well. One thing I do find weird on the exterior is the VW symbol, which is no longer 3D. It's just flat. It's almost like something you would find on an EV, I find. So I'm not sure about that. Wheel design is really nice. Don't get the performance back, just get the bigger wheels, I think, with the exhaust. I'm going to keep saying that to you guys. The other thing specific on the R are the side sills, which are lovely. You get the R logo there as well. If we switch it round to the rear, of course, your diffuser, you've got the quad pipes. The quad pipes are funny. They look quite fat. I joked around that it seemed like you went into Photoshop and you added a stroke to the shape. Only people who use Photoshop will get that joke. Pretty bad joke. But yeah, I like the look of it. And I like the fact that the R logo sits under the VW logo. I like that. The symmetry is cool. The new R logo is really nice as well, actually. I actually really like the rear lights. I like how they're a little bit slimmer. I like how the ones on the side are a little bit larger than the ones on the boot lid. And I really like the animation and the light design inside. It looks very smart. I really do wonder though, was the Volkswagen name needed on the B pillar? I mean, what is going on with that? So overall, it's still a sleeper, it's still a Q car. I don't know. I really want to know what you think. I like it. I do. I love the fact that you've got all these edges everywhere. It's very, very sharp. It reminds me of going from 991 to 992 on Porsche, where 991 was a bit rounded, too rounded, and 992 came and it had very, very sharp edges, very defined edges. This has got sharp edges everywhere, and I appreciate the design because of that. Now, this is a price car at almost 40,000. What do you get for it? Well, I've shown you what you get in terms of performance, which is pretty much on par with the rivals. In fact, in class, it's better because it's got a much better four-wheel drive system. But what do you get inside? Let's check it out, because the interior has changed massively compared to any other Golf in history so far. So guys, check out this interior of the Golf 8. It is a culture shock if you're used to Golf interiors. It is very, very different in here, particularly when you see how the previous Mark 7 or 7.5 was actually really quite similar to the structure of the Mark 3. And if I show you that now, you'll be like, wow, it really quite is. But then when you look at this one, it seems to be more similar to, I don't know, RS4 or something than anything from Golf's past. So it is a massive change in here. Some of it is for the good, some of it is for the not so good. I'm going to go through all of it. Undoubtedly, very modern interior. That is for absolute certain. My first impressions were, oh, this reminds me of how the 992 simplified things versus the 991. So gone are all your buttons and bits and pieces. Your bigger gear stick is replaced by a little nubbin like in the Porsche as well. So that was kind of my first impression. It's like, oh, okay, this is that idea of minimalistic design, getting rid of buttons, getting rid of the clutter, etc., etc. But then it doesn't really harken back that much to the Golf's past, certainly not like the Mark 7 did. What it does do though is bring things up in terms of technology. So we've got a fully digital screen here, a fully digital screen there, and this is the new Discover Media System by VW. It's all touchscreen here. It's a pretty responsive system, and it kind of reminds me of if you married Apple CarPlay with the Porsche PCM current new system, this would be its baby. So it's fairly easy to use. I like the fact that the buttons within the menus are rather large, so they're easy to click onto, and you'll find in a lot of systems like the Porsche ones, you just have buttons that are too small half the time. So I like that. I like the fact that it's easy to use. You've got Apple CarPlay in there, of course, and Android Auto. So all of those you can use with the touch system as well. The downside to it is stuff like heated seats are all hidden away in the menu system here. Even your ESP, if you want to do launch control, as we will do later, it's hidden within the menu system. Luckily, if I swipe down here, there is a shortcut for it. But otherwise, you have to delve quite deep into the system to get some of your basic functionality, which can be a right pain sometimes. And this is a folly not just of this system, but of every system that relies solely on touchscreen, because there is no nub in here to control the screen in front of you. One quirk of this car is the lane assist is always on. So you have to kind of go into the system and again turn that off by deep diving into it, which again can be a bit of a pain if you don't want it on all the time. But then conversely, the steering assist is bloody brilliant. Now before I get onto the touch button, the steering wheel itself is a real highlight for me. I really like how it's flat bottomed. I like that it's thin. I wish, for example, BMW had a steering wheel like this at the moment. I always complain how theirs seem like they all belong on 4x4s. None of them are sporty enough in any model. This is fantastic in that regard. It's a very sporty steering wheel. The paddle shifters, they're a nice size. They protrude from behind the steering wheel as well. The only shame about them is that they're not metal. That would have been a nice touch. But otherwise, really nice clicking feeling and a really nice shape. And like I said on the outside, the VW logo, now it's like this mirrored chrome thing without any 3D effect to it. And it's quite weird because half the time it doesn't look like a VW logo, it's just black. So that's quite odd. As far as the R changes go, we've got the new R logo here in the lower spoke, blue stitching all around, which matches the theme of the rest of the car. But yeah, the steering wheel, I'm a really big fan of it. This is lovely. Then you have your driver zone, fully digital. And at first look, it's quite small, but in using it, actually, I've actually quite liked the size of it because all of your information is quite well placed in it, particularly in this main screen that I've been using. This is the one I've preferred. But VW have done a good job of giving you a bunch of different screens as well. So you've got quite a bit of choice, you've got quite a bit of customization. And I think after Mercedes, this is the first car I've sat in that's had digital screens that you can actually customize almost every corner of the screen. So that's really well done. Though I do feel the graphics are a little bit childish. I don't know whether it's the use of the blue or the lack of textures. It's all just a little bit too simplified. I'd like to see a stage higher beyond this, but the actual functionality, the customization that you can do in it, this is brilliant. And I've been begging for other people to do it, and well done VW for really making the choice that you have here very good for the customer. The thing I don't like about the steering wheel are these touch elements here. The R logo is lovely, and you can just tap that, you go straight into your modes here, but sometimes you tap it by accident because it's right on the edge. And same with the heated seat one over here. It's very easy to accidentally turn it on. And this issue of inputs continues, particularly when you're driving. So the cruise control and the self-driving element of this car is brilliant. It's as good as any other car I've tried. But when you're changing speeds, you have this issue where there's a single click that you can do or a double click, and it all depends on your pressure. But the difference between the two is so low, particularly when you're driving, that you could easily jump to adding 5 miles per hour rather than 1, just because you tapped it too hard, which again is very easy to do when you're driving. And I've said this about other manufacturers who do this as well, having swipes, etc. within here, I don't find it useful. You need just normal buttons so you have a positive affirmation of what you're doing. So you don't need to be looking here or looking there to see if what you did worked or not. It looks great and it's lighted at night, etc. Again, the R logo, I love it. I love the fact that it's blue. But I just think normal buttons, minimalism is okay, but the problem with it is when it starts interfering with your daily work. And when it makes things slower, then you're losing out. Another highlight actually was the key. I quite like this key. It's got a bit of a rubberized texture when you're pressing the buttons. The actual look of it is rather quite wonderful. Almost like a nice Apple device. Good job on that. Individual mode is so extensive in this car, you wouldn't believe it. If you get DCC, which you absolutely have to get for your suspension, you've got, I don't know how many, is there like 12, 13 different settings for the suspension? How does that even work? But it's great because it's so customizable. Then you've got your steering, where you've got comfort, sport, or race. You've got, again, the same options within drive. Engine sound, you've got comfort, sport, race, or pure, which is an interesting one as well. And then you can customize all of these to your liking, and then that's the individual mode. Otherwise, in your driving select, you have race, sport, and comfort. The car actually defaults to sport, which is nice actually. You don't need to really move it from there. It's a nice midpoint. Race gives you slightly more exciting exhaust sound. You get some pops and bangs, as you'll see later. I'm not going to turn the car on because it doesn't give you anything in terms of revving. The seats in the R are lovely. I hope you like blue though, because there's a lot of blue in here. I like the fabric, I like the grey Alcantara type look, the R logo in there as well, and they're very supportive, particularly for a hatchback. They're a win for me. And in the back, the same theme continues in quite a spacious rear seating arrangement. You can see I have the child seat in the back as well, loads of room for the little one to swing his legs around, lots of headroom for adults as well. It's a Golf, it's exactly what you expect. Boot space, big, wide, great aperture for getting things in. Shame that there's no boot closing button, but in terms of actual space, practicality, it's quite fantastic. When I mentioned the Audi thing, it was this vent that goes across here that really reminds me of it. But I don't think it's bad, I just don't think it's super Golf. What's nice about it is though, you've got loads of ambient lighting all around the car and it highlights all of these areas. Ambient lighting gives you quite a few options and you get the light in quite a few areas. It actually looks quite lovely at night. Though with the blue interior, you invariably end up going with a lot of blue, which looks quite fantastic. Then I mentioned it reminding me of Porsche. This particular area here with the driver zone, etc., and your selection buttons near the screen reminds me very much of Taycan. So it feels very premium, a lot more premium than the Mark 7 did. You've got USB-C cables everywhere, you've got a charging mat here, which was a bit temperamental for me. It did not like my iPhone 12. It kept saying that it couldn't charge it, which is weird. The dashboard and the door cards, everything is quite sculpted, even this. And it's quite nice, the new design language. It is. It's very, very sporty. It's very, very modern. I just wish that the whole interior had a few more buttons to make life a little bit easier. So guys, that's the new Golf R interior. I really like it. I like the sculpted look of it. I like the digital screens, the way they've done it. I love the steering wheel. Some things I don't like, and if it sounds like I'm having a moan, it's only because I want this car to improve even more. Because as you'll see in a second, when it comes to driving, this car is incredible. Right guys, to begin, we're going to test out the launch control. To activate it, you actually have to disengage traction control, and that means going into the system, then going into brakes, and then turning it off. So it's really weird. It doesn't sound like they want you to do it, but from what I saw, it's pretty quick. So let's see what it's like. Wow. 4 seconds dead. You can check it out there on the Racebox Pro. Guys, if you want to get this, by the way, I've got a discount code for you guys on Racebox. You can see it on the screen there. 4 seconds. That is bloody quick. Shall we try that again? Let's try that again. I'm fascinated by this. There you go, second try again, 4.1 seconds. This is really fast for a car in this class, and it feels it as well. Considering the official figures are 4.7, it in fact comes in a smidge under, as we said the previous one. So clearly, this is doing a good job. I do wonder if it's the more intelligent all-wheel drive system that we have here. It's a very nice and dry day here today as well. But no, I'm very impressed with that. That is very quick for this class. And that story about the speed of this car continues. Is a seriously quick hot hatch, this. I must mention, of course, we've started in race mode, because you're in a Golf R. It's got to be in the R mode, hasn't it? I'd like to reiterate, I like the fact that you have the R logo here in order to access the different driving modes. I have found myself accidentally pressing that button though, and it comes back to kind of the usability of the steering wheel that we were discussing. Not the greatest thing in the world, and I do the same with the heated steering button that's on the same side, right on the edge, so they need to rethink that a little bit, I think. Maybe a separate switch or toggle like Porsche and Merc and BMW do might be a good idea in order to stop you from doing that. What's nice is you get a really nice mid-range punch out of this. I think a little bit more than the previous R. Maybe it's that extra 10% of torque that we have in this throughout the rev range from 2 to about 5,000 revs. I mean, this EA AAA engine, it is really good. And you can see why it's lasted since 2007. It's just a brilliant engine. Yes, we're on its 4th evolution now, but It's a cracking bit of kit. What's quite nice is how responsive the DSG gearbox is as well. I've driven all too many torque converters recently in various types of cars. They just don't shift quick enough. This DSG, it's instantaneous in its shifting. What's really annoying though is because you don't have the performance package, regardless of what mode you're in, it will upshift for you. So you cannot hold it at the red line and shift when you want. And if you had the performance package, this wouldn't happen. Look, I'm not shifting, it is. It's another $2,000 on top of this. This is a pretty lightly spec car at about 42, which when you think for a Golf R, it's a lot of money. And then you get drift mode, which mechanically this car is identical, right? So you still have the split torque on the rear axle. That performance pack just adds a mode for it, which, let's be honest, how many Golf R drivers are really going to use that? But that's not what this is for, and we're seeing this more and more with these variable torque systems. Drift mode is a great marketing tool, and it's good for people who want to put on a bit of a show on a closed track, but what it actually signifies is just how variable the all-wheel drive system is, that you can send that much power to the rear to allow it to oversteer. And again, what's more important for us guys is that when I'm taking a turning like this, rather than feeling your front wheels scammer to try and put power down, instead you get a much more rear-wheel drive feeling out of this car compared to the previous generation. So if we brake in hard and then power out, rather than the front scampering around, I can feel the rear working, and it allows me to actually put the power down earlier. It felt much more rear-wheel drive than the previous gen did. And for me, this is the key to the MK8 Golf R, whereas I wouldn't advise you to change it from the MK7 for any other reason in terms of sound, interior, etc., exterior. I think that's a great car still. If you'd like to really push your cars to the limit, then you will really feel how much better the all-wheel drive system is in this Golf R. I must admit, when this car first arrived and I tried it, I was like, is this really the Golf R that I've heard so much about? You know, where is the excitement? But now, when I've been able to access the car's talents by pushing it to the limit, now I'm really starting to see what it's able to do. And it's not just like the brilliant all-wheel drive system. I really like the braking as well. It's very predictable. It's very comfortable when you're driving normally, but under tension, they work fantastically well. They've got great stopping power. You can brake later and later, and you feel you have a lot of control over the way they behave with your foot, which is so important for a car like this. So you've got this wonderful mix of a more intelligent all-wheel drive system that allows you to put the power down early and with more confidence. You've got bigger and better brakes with better feel that allow you to brake even later, and you start to see why this car was that much quicker on the ring than the previous version. And then on top of all of that, the lack of body roll on this, I mean, the rigidity is quite fantastic for a hot hatch within this segment. It's really starting to feel more like a sports car hiding within a hatchback shell rather than just a hot hatch, which is, again, it's great for this segment of hot hatches. And then what's cool is you can go back into our drive select, put it into comfort, and this is the best part of the Golf R. And it's why so many people love buying them, because when you go back into the normal mode, suddenly it is just a normal Golf. And it's not like most performance cars where you're a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more quiet. This literally just turns into a mild churner, especially with the optional DCC dynamic chassis control. It's an absolute must-get option. The suspension is really, really comfortable in comfort, and you get some really good rigidity in the sportier settings. Good mileage, really good comfort, brilliant on the motorway, really brilliant in every scenario. And then when you want a bit more excitement, all you gotta do is press that R button, you're straight into race, and the sports car side of the Golf R wakes up. It's actually really quite got under my skin, this. I think I'm appreciating it more because it's not of the ilk of the rest of the cars in class. It's got the best bits of the cars from the class above, and that's why I'm finding this car fascinating, I think. So you've got a great mix of a comfortable Golf, it really covers that well, better than anything else in class, I think. Then you have a more intelligent all-wheel drive system than anyone else has got. cracking speed at 4 seconds, dead 0 to 60. Amazing. Great handling for a car in its class. You get pops and bangs out of the exhaust as well on occasion, which is great. But more crucially, a great braking system paired to a great gearbox, a really responsive engine, and you've got all of those ingredients that a good performance car needs in order to stand out. Really fabulous car, really enjoyed driving it. I don't think you guys need to get the performance pack option. This car as it stands, lowly spec'd, it's perfect. Just make sure you get the suspension option. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed this. I've really enjoyed this car. It's really opened my eyes. Huge fan now of the Golf R. If you enjoyed this, please do like, subscribe, share this with your petrolhead friends. More VWR coming on the channel soon. See you next time.